Hi there. Today we're talking about founder share repurchase rights. This is an important topic for founders to understand because it's all about fairness between you and your fellow co-founders. So let's start off with an example. Suppose we have this company called Exempli. Now Exempli has three founders. The first is Sarah. She's the CEO. The next is Bogdan, who will be the CFO. And the third is Amin, who will be the CTO. When they incorporate, all three get founder shares. So some things to know about founder shares. First, they're issued to founders, usually when the company is incorporated or shortly thereafter. Second, they're invariably common shares. That is to say, they don't have any special rights or preferences. And third, they're issued for next to nothing. Typically a fraction of a cent or something like that. The idea is that these shares will grow in value as the company develops its business, largely through the hard work of the founders. So in our example, let's say that Sarah gets 1 million founder shares, Bogdan gets 500,000 founder shares, and Amin gets 500,000 founder shares as well. So the total shares of Exempli are 2 million shares. Now, this allocation is just an example. When you're setting up your business, you should expect to negotiate the founder allocations based on factors that are unique to your business. So back to our example, let's say the founders decide on a subscription price of just 1/1000th of a cent. This means that Sarah would pay just $10 for her shares, Bogdan would pay $5 for his shares, and Amin would also pay $5. Before we get into how founders share repurchase rights work, let's just take a quick look at what could happen if there weren't any in place. Let's say that Amin leaves after 6 months. So Amin is gone. Without founder share repurchase rights in place, Amin would still be entitled to keep all 500,000 shares. Let's say that after 4 years, Exempli is sold for $10 million and no further shares have been issued. In that event, Amin would still own 25% of the company, but was only contributing as a founder for 8% of the company's life. You can probably guess how Sarah and Bogdan would feel about this outcome. In Exempli, though, they're trying to do things as typically as possible, and they put in place an agreement that provides for a 4-year vesting schedule for founder shares. So how does this work? Well, taking Bogdan as an example, 125,000 shares would vest in year 1. In year 2, another 125,000 shares would vest, and so on. Until at the end of year 4, all 500,000 shares would have vested. Stepping back for a sec, I should probably explain what vesting means. Vesting is just a fancy word to say that shares are earned and can't be taken away, at least not for a nominal repurchase price. Just moving back to the example, how does this work in practice? Well, let's say that in year 3, Bogdan is given a job offer to work at a big tech company. So Bogdan's gone. So what happens to his shares? Well, because it's in year 3, his year 1 shares will have vested, his year 2 shares will have vested, but his year 3 and year 4 shares will not have vested. So what happens to these unvested shares? Well, because of the founder share repurchase rights, Exempli can repurchase these 250,000 unvested shares back at the original issue price, or $2.50. So because Bogdan resigned after 2 years, he will have to sell back 250,000 founder shares to Exempli for next to nothing. And once those founder shares are repurchased by Exempli, they just get canceled. So the total number of shares after that cancellation decreases. So what's the effect of all this? Well, let's say that when Bogdan leaves, Exempli is worth $4 million. Before Bogdan left, he would have been entitled to 25% of that value based on his shares, or $1 million. And Amin would also have been entitled to $1 million, and Sarah would have been entitled to $2 million. But with the founder share repurchase rights in place, Bogdan is essentially transferring $500,000 of value back to Exempli when Exempli repurchases his shares. And that $500,000 of value will accrue largely to the benefit of Sarah and Amin, the other founders, without them having to do anything, because their relative ownership percentages have increased since the total number of shares has decreased. So after the repurchase, Sarah still has 1 million shares, Bogdan now has 250,000 shares, and Amin has 500,000 shares. And if Exemply were sold for its current $4 million valuation, Sarah would now be entitled to approximately $2.29 million. Bogdan would be entitled to just $571,000, and Amen would be entitled to $1.14 million. So that's basically how founder share repurchase rights work. I should note, though, that this is a pretty simple example. Many co-founders will negotiate and discuss these terms in advance. So, for instance, vesting could be 3 years instead of 4, or shares could start vesting on a monthly basis after, say, a year. Investors may also want changes to the founder share vesting schedule or insist on founder share repurchase rights if you don't already have them in place. If you're a founder negotiating a financing, you should be prepared for that discussion. Also, some founder share agreements will include a right to repurchase shares that have vested. If this is the case, though, vested shares generally must be repurchased at fair market value instead of the original purchase price, except in special circumstances. But if you take one thing away from all of this, I hope it will be the knowledge that these founder share repurchase rights aren't automatic. If you want to avoid unfair outcomes amongst your co-founders, you should get these agreements in place early. I'll close with a plug for the Denton's Founder Series. We have a whole chapter devoted to founder shares, so it'd be worth checking out if you haven't already. All right, that's it. Thanks so much for watching.